This is the very first in the Missing series by Margaret Patterson Hattix. Let me try it. Oh, all of that was wrong. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with the books that I read in December. So it is officially like the first full week of January, and I think it's time to wrap up everything that I read in December. Now, December was kind of crazy. I ended up reading 12 books. I just had quite a lot that I wanted to read anyway. If you'll remember, my husband did a video with me here where he picked my December TBR, or at least part of it. He picked 4 books for me to read in December, and then I had a couple books that I wanted to read for like a Christmas time, and then I also had a couple books that were on that list of 12 books that I wanted to read by the end of the year that I hadn't finished yet. So that was already going on like 8 books, and then G from Book Roast released that she was doing the Winter Magical Readathon, but you couldn't prepare because it was a step-by-step kind of get the prompts as you go. She had a website, which I'll leave her video down below, because you can do this like at any time. You don't have to like only do it during December. Basically, you go through the second Harry Potter like you're Harry, and depending on your answers to certain questions, you get certain prompts, and each week, or each chapter, there's 5 chapters, you can have up to 1 to 3 prompts. But that was also played a part in it. So I have a lot of books to wrap up. I didn't take as many good notes as I thought I did. I think I was just so excited to start 2020 with taking good notes that I forgot to do it during December. So we'll see what I can remember from these. I think that's enough introduction. Let's just go in and talk about the books that I read. The very first book that I picked up is actually the only book that I had to read for the first chapter of Magical Readathon, and that was The Best Christmas Pageant Ever by Barbara Robinson. The prompt that I had was to pick up your most recently acquired book. This is just like a super, like, teeny, like it's just barely over 100 pages, and this reminds me so much of a Roald Dahl book. Like, that's the vibe that I got when I was reading this. This basically follows a group of kids called the Hindermans, yes, and they're a family, and they're like super bad. They're like the black sheep of the entire neighborhood. No one really wants to be part of them. They're just mean to everybody. And they basically take over this Christmas pageant and have no idea what to do or what the story is. Like, they don't know about baby Jesus. They don't understand why the wise men are doing what they're doing. And it's just really interesting because they get this story retold to them and they have so many questions. But it's actually like really cute, and I liked the ending. The ending was very, very sweet. So I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars because it was very adorable. And it's one of my husband's family's favorites. They talk about this a lot, and I had never read it, but now I have, and it was very cute. I don't really have a whole lot to say about it because there's not a whole lot to say, but it's definitely a children's book, so you can sit down and read this one to your entire family. You can read this book in like 2 or 3 hours, depending on how fast or slow you read. I enjoyed this book. It was very good. The next book that I ended up picking up was one of the 2 books on that list of 12 that I needed to finish by the end of the year, and that was The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is a very interesting book because it's classic sci-fi, and I've read a handful of classic sci-fi before, but nothing quite like this. And it basically follows this guy who is an explorer on this planet where gender isn't a thing except for when you're mating. It's bizarre. Like, it's a really interesting idea concept, and I was wondering about how they were going to do this with like being non-gender and that kind of thing, and I thought that was really interesting. I didn't like this book as much as I thought, and I think honestly it's because I'm not old enough to understand a lot of things that are happening in here. And I say that because I'm sure I missed so much. This is a very slow book. This is, I would say, more character-driven than plot-driven. It has its moments with plot, but it's definitely a more character-driven story, and those are not generally my favorite types of books, but it's very scientific, and I do not have a scientific brain, so like, this is a character study on a type of people, and yes, there is some like human parts to it, and you're learning about, you know, all this types of things, but like the main character's brain is very scientific, and it's just a lot. And I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. So I did end up giving this one 3 stars, because there were parts of it that I really, really enjoyed. There are chapters between the chapters where there's just like little snippets of kind of this world's mythology, for lack of a better word, stories of how people came to be and things like that. So like that was really, really interesting, because without fail, something that was said in that little itty chapter would become important in the next chapter. So it definitely had a purpose. I liked how it was laid out. I will say that about halfway through, the point of view changed, where it was by one person at the beginning, and then by the end, the chapters were flipping back and forth between our 2 kind of main characters, and they didn't tell you who was who. So you could be reading for 2 pages and then all of a sudden realize, oh, this person is actually this one. And then you'd have to kind of go back and reread those 2 pages, because they don't tell you who the person is, and you only know that because they say like the other person's name. It felt really long for the material, and I felt like kind of in the middle it was just going on this long journey, and it's just a lot of long journey in the snow. But I don't usually like those in between, we're going on a long journey, so we're gonna go sit in a tent for 10 chapters and have fun. And like that was really boring to me, so I was trying to get through those parts to get to the end, because honestly I would have DNF'd this book, but I thought that there might be something that happened at the end that could change my opinion on it one way or the other, and I'm glad I waited, because there was some stuff that happened at the end, but it was also just kind of like, oh, okay, and then I moved on with my life. I don't know what it was about this book, but I didn't hate it, which is why I gave it a good 3 star. The next book that I picked up is actually the only graphic novel, yes, that I picked up this month, and that is Mira Tidebaker by Danielle Page, and is illustrated by Stephen Byrne. This is one that I picked up at YALLFest in November. It seemed really, really interesting. It was kind of about the lost city of Atlantis, and I really liked the art style. I thought that was really beautiful, and it wasn't very big, so I thought it might be fun. What I didn't realize going into this was that this was about a main character in the story of Aquaman. So it's a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Superhero? That's the word. It's like a superhero novel, but it's like the prequel to the story. So I gave this 3 stars because the story itself was fine. Like it was very short. It wrapped up really, really quickly. But the point of it is to give kind of like an idea of what's going to happen to this character who a lot of people know from the Aquaman world. And like I haven't seen any of the Aquaman, I've never read any of the Aquaman stories, and I didn't know that going into it. So I was so confused most of the time, and it felt very kind of like one-dimensional most of the way through. And I think that's because you're supposed to have already understood who these characters are, and I don't. But I did pick this one up for one of the prompts for the Magical Readathon, and that one was, let's see, to read a comic book, manga, or picture book, or graphic novel. It was good. I enjoyed it for what it was, but it did kind of feel very like monotone blah. Like there wasn't a lot of character development because of the fact that it was a prequel and you're supposed to have already known who these people were. The next book that I picked up was one of the 4 books that my husband picked out for me, and that is The Hound of the Baskerville by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This is one of his Sherlock Holmes stories. I've never read a Sherlock Holmes story before this one. I did know this play. I had seen a version of this play a few years ago, so I was familiar with the story. Honestly, I think that helped me kind of knowing this story already, because the writing style is just, it's just boring. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. It's just kind of, it feels like stream of consciousness, and I know it's not, but that's kind of what it felt like to me. I don't know, like it felt distant. Like I felt not connected to the characters in this book, and I don't know if it's because I've already known the story, if it's because of this story specifically. I don't know. I like the idea of Sherlock Holmes. I love when I see versions of Sherlock Holmes, and I do like the mystery aspect of his stories. I just don't think I'm in love with the writing style of it, I think, is my problem. But I did end up giving this one 3.5 stars because like I really did enjoy this. I had a lot of 3 stars back to back here. The next book that I picked up is The Reptile Room by Lemmy Snicket. This is the second in a series of unfortunate events. As I've said multiple times on this channel, I am rereading this series with Serena from Wandering Mind, and it was just the next one. The second one in this series, I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. I definitely enjoyed this one more than the first one, and honestly I think that's because the situation that the kids are under in this one is so much better than the first one, and then so much better than literally all of the other ones. Like, this is the happiest they will be, I think, in this series from what I can remember. The writing style in this one is very similar to the first one. It's a very simplistic writing style because it is made for a lot younger audience, but it didn't seem to annoy me as much in this one, and I feel like that's because of what it was about. I definitely enjoyed this more than the first one, and I gave it 4 stars, and I had fun rereading this one. It wasn't as gloomy, so I think that one was better. The next book that I picked up was one of the books that Chris picked out for me, but it also fulfills one of the prompts, one of the 2 prompts that I got in the second chapter for the Magical Readathon, and that is Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH by Robert C. O'Brien, and this filled the prompt to read a book with an orange cover or has orange in the title. Well, this entire like section here is orange, and like the back is orange, and like there's a lot of orange things happening here. This one is one of my husband's like favorite books from childhood, but it was very good. Now I will say you have to disband your belief a little bit with this book, and it is made for kids, so I think kids won't have a problem doing that, but the animals in this, like, it totally follows a mouse for kids and a bunch of rats, and like an owl's in there, there's like a crow going on, so like all of these animals can talk, but also like I don't want to say too much because I feel like it'll spoil like the whole thing with the rats, but like there's just a lot with them. Like, you have to disband so much belief with this book. There's a really good chunk of the story is the rats telling a story of kind of who they are and how they became the way that they are, and I found that really, really interesting. I think that was my favorite part of the story, was just kind of learning about them and how they became them. And I think there's a lot of really good morals that the rats have, which I think is hysterical, and I would have never thought to put in a like kids book, but like it makes you really think about some stuff. But I really, really enjoyed this one. So I did give this one 4 out of 5 stars. I think I couldn't give it all the way 5 stars just because it still felt a little like silly to me, but I did really enjoy this book, and I'm glad that I read this because now I can say that I've read this. The next book that I picked up was another one that Chris picked out for me. This is the only adult one. Everything else, that's not true. Sherlock Holmes was an adult book. Anyway, but that was Camino Island by John Grisham. Now, John Grisham is like his favorite writer of all time. This one is about a heist where they steal the manuscripts of books, and it follows a writer who is being drafted by this company that's kind of like the FBI, but they're not. They're like a privately owned company, and to go to this island, Camino Island, because her grandmother has a house there, and it makes sense for her to go and try to write her second book there. And there's a bookseller on this island that they think might have these manuscripts, and she's supposed to kind of like wiggle her way in and get to know him a little bit better. And I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. I found the layout of this book really, really interesting. There's only about 8 chapters in this book, but each chapter is split up into like 20 different parts. And it was really interesting getting to know the people on this island, watching this writer go through and kind of struggle with getting to know them and then becoming like friends with them, and then also still having to do what she was sent to the island to do. And I found the writing nothing special, and I don't know if that's because of the story. The story just felt like there wasn't much plot to it, and like I wouldn't call this a character study, but I also wouldn't call this plot driven either. So it's just like that somewhere in between, but it was like in this weird in between place. So like I didn't absolutely love this book, but I also definitely enjoyed parts of this book. Like the heist at the beginning was awesome. I will say that a lot of this writing style is very like matter of fact. There's not a lot of descriptions. There's not a lot of like flowery language. It's very like, this is how it is. This is what's happening. This is like, like very structurally. Like it's not fancy, it's very simplistic and matter of fact. I don't think that's my favorite type of writing, the more I like actually start looking at people and their writing style, but I am willing to give John Grisham a second chance. I'd like to do maybe one of his more kind of courtroom dramas, because that's like one of the main things that he writes. This is a good introduction, and I did like the idea of the heist and like the bookish aspects of this. It was good, but it wasn't crazy memorable. Now, unlike that last one, which was very middle of the road and kind of not a lot happening, the next book is the polar opposite, and that is Found. This is the first one in the Missing series by Margaret Patterson Haddix. This is the first of 8, and I'm like now invested. Like, I can't even describe to you what this book is about without spoiling like so much about this book. But I would categorize this as a middle grade sci-fi thriller-ish. There are like hints at paranormal a little bit in this book, so that's what I use this for. I did read this for one of the prompts for the Magical Readathon, and it was to read a book with some kind of paranormal aspect to it, and there's kind of paranormal aspects in this book, but basically it follows these 2 boys who are adopted, and they get these messages in their mailbox, and one of them says like, you are one of the missing, and then the second one says like, they're coming after you or something like that, and so like they're trying to basically figure out where they came from, and so one of the boys' sister is also helping them out, so it's the 3 of them just kind of like trying to figure out what's going on. And my God, like it blows your mind. It just kind of blows your mind. This is just like a really good book for a kid that has a lot of imagination, because you do have to suspend belief a little bit. I feel like the way that she layers in the parts that are not as believable with like modern day believable stuff is well done. I think it's well done. I'm just really intrigued to see like what's gonna happen, because the second book, I'm like literally about to start it like relatively soon after filming this, and like I need to know. It's all over the place. It's crazy. I love it. 5 stars. It's very good. The next book that I read is, I would consider it my guilty pleasure read of the month, and that is A McGregor Christmas by Nora Roberts. Now, this one actually has 2 stories in it. There's one called Rebellion, which is kind of an actual like full-length novel, and then she's got another one called In From the Cold, which all deals with one family, but 2 different timelines. And this is straight up a romance book. Yeah, yes. Now this is super adult, not just because it is a romance book and it has all of those aspects to it, but like, and this is not even a spoiler at all, in the prologue of the very first story, there's a rape scene, and I feel like it's very out of nowhere, and it's not described, so it's not an on-the-page thing. It's kind of one of those where like one of our main characters comes down and sees her mom and then kind of pieces together what's happened, but like you don't see it. And that's like a huge driver for like our main character and why she doesn't like English people. So basically, the first story follows 2 people, Serena and Brigham. I was very close. Serena and Brigham, and Serena is Scottish and Brigham is English. And Brigham is best friends with her brother, and so they come home one Christmas or winter to basically try to like start a revolt in Scotland, and she hates English people because of what happened to her mother in the prologue, and it's a love to hate. And then the second book follows their nephew. I feel like so much happened in the last like, I don't even know, 50 pages of the first book, and then the second like story is like super quick. I liked it because you got to see the main characters in the first book kind of like 30 years later and what happened to them, even though they're not the main characters. So like, I like that part of it, but it is a romance book. Everything you can possibly imagine that happens in a romance book happens in this book like 10 times. So it's very like guilty pleasure. I'm really glad that I read this. It was fun. It was exactly what I wanted for my Christmas read. I wanted something that I didn't have to think hard about, and this had a historical history aspect of it, so I did very much enjoy this. But it. Oh, okay. So the next book that I read is not a full book. I only read a part of it, and that will make sense. And that was because it was for one of the Magical Readathon prompts, and that is Meet Cute. It is an anthology of a bunch of other stories. However, there is one story in here called Somewhere That's Green by Meredith Russo, and I needed a book that started with S. Meredith Russo is the reason that I bought this book. I realized that she had a short story in here, and I think Meet Cutes are awesome anyway, and then after getting it and like reading more, I'm discovering I know a lot more authors in this story, but Meredith Russo is really good at writing trans stories because she is trans herself, and so it's really interesting seeing how she can do that in a very, very short period of time, and I love that so much. So I didn't actually rate this book, obviously, because I only read one story, but if I were to rate that story alone, I think I'd give that story 5 stars, 4.5 to 5 stars, because it's very cute. It's exactly what it is to meet cute between these two people, and there's not a whole lot of story about it, but I would love to see like a full story about these two people. I think that would be awesome, and just kind of like having this as the beginning and then see where it takes them, because like, I want to know what happens to these two people. And then the next book that I picked up was Amanda Wakes Up, and this is by Alison Camarada. This is one that was on the list of 12 books I needed to read by the end of the year, which is great. It also fulfills the prompt for the Winter Readathon to, where was it? Read the first book you think about. And so I was actually in the process of reading this one as I got that prompt, so this is what came to my mind first. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. This is one that I'd read about a third of in 2018, I believe, because I got it for my birthday that year. And so I listened to the beginning of it on audio, just kind of like to refresh my memory of kind of what was happening in this world. And then once I got to that part that I kind of stopped at, I picked it up again, and it's so good. It is so good. I think this is really good because it blurs the lines between left and right politically, because it is about a woman who is an anchor, and she's a reporter at first, and then she becomes an anchor at this place called Fair News, and their whole point is to show both sides of the same story, kind of bring you the facts, and then kind of let the viewers decide. But it takes place during a political campaign, during a political year, where one of the candidates that they can get on their show all of the time brings the ratings up, and so the show is so focused on getting ratings that no one's really listening to Amanda and how she's like, this is not right, we're only showing one side of the story. And so it's really kind of that struggle between left and right, basically. And she has a lot of family members who are very liberal, and her boyfriend is very, very liberal, and her just kind of being like, listen, I get it, but you have to listen to the other side as well. And how just like her whole process of listening to both sides of the story and seeing people on both sides of the same, situation. So it was just really interesting. And like I said, I think people on both sides of the aisle can really appreciate this book. It definitely dives into what newscasting is and what makes a show. And like being from news myself, it was really awesome just to like see this world, because the writer is from news. She's an anchor. She knows how news works. So not only is it accurate, it's like the best kind of accuracy ever, because it comes from someone who understands and has been in that same place. So I thought it was really, really well done. I'm so glad that I read this. Like, I want everybody to read this. I think it's amazing. And like I said, I don't care what aisle, like, side of the argument you are on, side of the aisle you are on, whether you're left or right, Democrat, Republican, it does not matter. This book, I think, is good for both people. So I'm really glad that I read that. So I got 2 more books really quickly that I want to mention. I'm not going to talk about like my thoughts on them or the star ratings on them, because I did finish them in January, but I did do them for the Magical Readathon, and I did fulfill a couple prompts. So I just wanted to mention those really quick. and that was read a book from the topmost shelf, and so I read The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black for that one. And then one was to read a book shorter than the last book that you had finished. So I picked up Legendary Ladies by Anne Shin because it's like maybe a third of Holly Black's book. But the very last book that I read in the month of December is 365 Days of Wonder by R.J. Palacio. Now this one is one that I've literally been reading since the first day of 2019, and it's just like you get quotes every single day and you read them, and like that's the whole point of them. But my favorite part was that at the beginning of every single month, what she would do was she would make like a little page or two from Mr. Brown's perspective, which is the teacher who does this precepts in the Story of Wonder, and he just kind of talks about something that month or just a little something that happens, and it's a good explanation and expansion on the Story of Wonder. But it's just like your good, hearty, you get a quote every single day, and like that's the whole point of it. So I did give this one, I think, 3 stars because it's a book about quotes. Like I don't know what to do because most of them aren't from her. They are from famous people, and so she just kind of compiled them into one thing. However, I will say what I liked is at the very back of the book, she has them separated by date, and the people who have said that quote, she gives you just kind of like a little bit of information about them, which I did really appreciate. But like, it's nothing crazy. It was great, and I'm glad I did that, but I'm also glad that it's over, because it stressed me out when I would like go a month without reading one and then go back and go, oh crap, now I gotta go a month. So, yes, I'm glad that I'm done with that. Alright, well, that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining me in the month of December. It was kind of crazy, it was kind of a little bit all over the place, but thank you for listening to me talk for such a long time. I had a kind of all over the place month, so like I can't think of anything that I hated, but I had a lot of like middle of the road books, but I also had some really good books, so it was just a good month for me, honestly. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Let me know down below if any of these books you've read, you have thoughts on. Let's chat. But yeah, if you like this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to be part of this awesome growing family. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!